Support for this episode comes from Omnipod. You know I'm a big fan of choice when it comes to diabetes technology. I get so excited when there's something new. If you live with diabetes, you deserve to find the best fit for you. That's just one reason I'm working with Omnipod to help spread the word about what makes it so easy to test their system out. If you want to try an insulin pump or see what life without tubes is all about, you can try Omnipod even if your current tubed pump is in warranty. Really, you heard that right. And if it's not right for you, no problem. Omnipod does not tie you down with a contract or a tube. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. Terms and conditions apply. For full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions, visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, Eversense is now a 365-day continuous glucose monitor. 1 year, 1 CGM, they say. Eversense is the only CGM with a sensor that sits fully under the skin. The transmitter's still on top, but you can remove that. It comes on and off. Earlier this year, the FDA designated the device an iCGM, which means it can now work with insulin pumps. Lots of milestones here and lots of questions for Brian Hanson, president of CGM at Ascensia Diabetes Care, the company behind Eversense. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. Always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. I'm your host, Stacey Sims. My son was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2, almost 18 years ago. You guys, Benny is going to be 20 soon. You've been with me for a long time. I can't believe it either. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I do not have any kind of diabetes, but I have a background in broadcasting, and that's how you get the podcast. Mom's Night Out Philadelphia is this Friday. You guys, this is our 7th Mom's Night Out event. It is our last one of 2024. Cannot wait to see this amazing crowd. I know a lot of the people that are going to be there, but so many more new people to meet. Thrilled at the excitement that's going on here. And then we are on to Atlanta in January, and I think we're almost ready. I'm really hoping to announce all of the 2025 locations right after Philly, so stay tuned for that. This event is growing beyond my wildest imagination, and I kind of feel like we're just getting started. As always, more information, go to diabetes-connections.com, click on Mom's Night Out or the Events tab. Lots of information there. All right, on to the topic at hand, Eversense CGM. If you're very familiar with this, if you've listened to every episode we have done so far, and there have been many, you can skip ahead a little bit, but I just don't want to assume that everyone listening has the same knowledge. So very quickly, this is a tiny sensor that is placed under the skin in your upper arm by a healthcare provider. You'll hear Brian talk about the procedure. It's very quick. Some endos do it right in their office. The sensor sits fully under the skin for 1 year now. But there is a transmitter that goes on top. It is removable. It can come off and on and off and on. You don't throw it away. You do change the adhesive every day, but they say it causes almost no skin reactions. And anecdotally, I haven't really heard about anybody having reactions to this in our community. You do have to charge the transmitter and you do have to calibrate, but you're going to hear that the calibration has changed with the length of the sensor now. This device is only approved for adults. You have to be over the age of 18. I mentioned the episodes we've done previously. We've been following this device really closely. I'm going to link them all up in the show notes here, not just with the company, but with people who have used this device. You're going to hear me refer in the interview to Chris Rudin, who is a familiar name and face to many of you. We've talked to him a couple of times about his experience with Eversense, along with other folks. So go ahead to diabetes-connections.com. This episode's homepage will have a lot more information. All right, this week I'm talking to Brian Hanson. You heard me call him the president of CGM at Ascensia Diabetes Care. That's a new title. But Hanson is the former chief commercial officer at Tandem Diabetes Care. So he's in a unique position to talk about interoperability. That's really the number one question you all had about Eversense. When will it work with insulin pumps? Quick note about this interview. A little bit later on, you're going to hear Brian mention the name Tim a couple of times. Now, the first time he's talking about Tim Goodnow, who is the CEO of the company. But the second time, we're both talking about Tim, who's on the public relations staff, and he is listening in on the call. Now, that is pretty standard for these interviews, nothing nefarious here. He also never interrupted us or changed anything. And that's actually pretty standard on how it goes with all of my interviews when PR people are on the line. But I did want him to clarify which Tim he meant at which time. And finally, we had a specific question about the charging mechanism. I'm going to come back after the interview and give you all of the information on that. Brian wanted to make sure he had the correct information. It's a little technical, so that's coming after the interview. Thank you for all of the questions. I really do try to get all of them answered, or at least as many as I can. It's all coming up right after this. I've been talking about integration for years, and it's just been wonderful to see it all happening. Dexcom G6 is part of Tandem Diabetes Control IQ system and part of the Omnipod 5 system. My son has been using Control IQ for more than 4 years now. These systems are really amazing. He sleeps better, and the system has his back when he doesn't get his meal bolus exactly right. As a mom, I will never stop worrying, but I worry a lot less. We all just think about diabetes less, which is really amazing. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Brian Hanson, welcome to Diabetes Connections. Thanks for being here. Lots of interest in this. I appreciate you spending some time with me and my listeners. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. Looking forward to it.
All right. I'm not exactly sure where to start because I am equally interested in the 1 year, 365-day designation and the iCGM designation. So I guess we'll flip a coin. Let's start with the 1 year designation for this. How significant is this for Eversense?
Yeah, 1 year, one CGM is our tagline right now, right? The world's first and only 365-day continuous glucose monitor just sounds nice. To be able to now reduce the insertion from twice a year to once a year, but evenly important to get to one calibration a week after, a few weeks of testing it every day, I think is something patients have been looking for a long time. So just convenient to only have to do an insertion once a year, and certainly to get to the calibration level we have today just shows how well this product works. The same performance characteristics, yet double the wear time, is a really tremendous achievement for Senseonics.
So tell us a little bit more about what that looks like. I think people are now familiar, certainly my listeners are very familiar with Eversense. Goes under the skin. There's a piece that goes on top of that. But the calibration here, I think, is really important to focus on because, and you guys have come on the show a lot in the last several years as we've watched the evolution of this and have alluded to the fact that you will not have to calibrate every day. So just focus on that for a minute of what it looks like. And I don't know, maybe for those who really don't understand, because finger sticking is not something that is as common as it used to be in this community, which is very strange to say, what calibration is.
When you start with our product, again, it's a 1 year sensor. So naturally that 1 year sensor cannot be factory calibrated or necessarily be accurate over a full year without a calibration, or in this case, a blood glucose meter, a finger stick.
Right.
And so after a few weeks of calibrating on a daily basis, you then transition to once a week, and the product will ask you to calibrate it. You'll do a finger stick, you'll put the value in, and it will basically take a look and see what that value is compared to the value that is being taken by the sensor itself, and it will ultimately calibrate itself. And it's really a self-check over that year period to make sure that the sensor continues to operate properly, work properly, and stays within the range. One thing we certainly saw in the clinical trial is there was exceptional accuracy over the 1 year period. And as I said earlier, the same performance characteristics are in the 1 year product that were in the 6-month product, both from an accuracy as well as survivability perspective. So we were very, very pleased with that. And now going from daily calibrations to once a week calibrations is a tremendous win for the patients. I mean, it saves time, it saves money. Eliminating those insertions is something, or eliminating those calibrations is something that all of our patients were looking for.
What is the accuracy? What's the MARD? And does it change over the year?
It doesn't. The MARD is between 8 and 9, and it's very consistent across the full range of glycemic control. So very, very, again, happy and fortunate that the performance characteristics, still play out all the way through the 365-day period versus what some people might think would change because of the extended wear. It did not. So again, a very accurate, very robust sensor.
Lots more questions to come on that, but let's jump ahead to the iCGM designation, because this means that you can now start talking integration with pump systems.
First, is there anything of note in terms of the designation, anything different from other CGMs? Or was this the FDA said, nope, check the box, good to go?
Yeah. Well, first off, the timing was great for us because we got the iCGM approval towards the end of April. And that was right about the timing we were getting ready to submit the 365-day sensor. So, I've always said there's three things that come with iCGM. First, it's that seal of approval that you've, hit this very high bar for performance and reliability. And that we did. The second piece is it takes it from a PMA designation or a longer submission period with the FDA to a 510K designation. And when we were putting the 365-day product in, that was certainly advantageous to move that to a 90-day 510K. Just makes it simpler, faster, and a little bit more reliable. So the timing of that was excellent. But what everybody wants to know then is when will it communicate with my pump, right? And what I've said publicly is it allowed us to have now meaningful conversations with pump companies to say that we have the iCGM designation. It certainly makes the work easier from a regulatory perspective, but it doesn't change all the work that has to go on behind the scenes from a technical perspective to make the two products communicate with each other. And then you had the promise of the 365 coming, which we believe will, offer an inflection point for the product and the company and make us a little bit more interesting, to any of the pump companies that are out there that would be looking to add choice to their product. So what I would say publicly today, Stacey, is those discussions are certainly ongoing. They are meaningful, and there are some collaborations with multiple pump companies underway. We will see what that means from a timing perspective and from a public announcement perspective, but just having the iCGM and having that pathway was certainly advantageous for us. And now it has allowed us to start to move in that direction. We'd certainly love all the pump companies to consider it, but everybody has different resources and opportunities to integrate a product like this. And it's not just done overnight, right? This takes some time, as we certainly have seen with other pump and CGM integrations. But I'm very happy to say that those discussions are robustly underway.
Is there a difference in the mechanics of how a CGM like this would connect with insulin pumps, as opposed to they're not completely over the skin, but as opposed to Dexcom or Abbott? I mean, you understand what I'm asking, Brian. I'm
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. I would first say on a technical level, I'm not sure I know the answer to that question, but at the end of the day, on a very basic level, they're all Bluetooth connective devices, right? So today our Bluetooth sits in the transmitter that sits on the outside of the body and transmits to a phone or a watch and ultimately to a pump. So that Bluetooth connectivity is probably fairly standard and isn't probably a whole lot different than what might be in an existing CGM today. And then the real fun will be when we put it completely under the body, eliminate the transmitter, and have that opportunity for it to communicate from underneath the skin. That might be a different conversation at that point because you're obviously going you just have a different mechanism of the way that you'll have to transmit. But again, it's Bluetooth to a device. I would say from a very layman's perspective, that's fairly common and simplistic.
Yeah.
Simplistic, it's the same mechanism, right? It's a Bluetooth.
So to be clear, and correct me if I'm wrong here, as you listen, we're talking about the system as it is now, which is the sensor is completely under the skin, but the transmitter does go on top. So the Bluetooth connection would be that piece that you've seen. Chris Rudin always wears it. I see his tattoos and he's got the black spot on top. So that goes. But Brian just alluded to under the skin completely, which I'm going to put a pin in, Brian, and we're going to get to a little bit later because that is absolutely fascinating. But for where we stand now and for what's approved, it would be the transmitter that's still outside the body and comes off and goes back on.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
Yep.
Let's talk about that as well. With the 365-day designation, there's no change, right, in how people would use the system. The transmitter still can come on and come off as many times as you want. It's not. And as I said, we've done a lot of episodes about this, but if you've never seen it, I'm going to attach some videos because it really is unique in that you can take the transmitter off and then put it right back on without clicking into anything or inserting anything else, right?
Yeah, that silicone-based adhesive is quite magical, to be honest with you. And, a patient gets a whole bunch of them, right, to be able to take them off every day when they shower or whenever they choose to and put a new one on. But the transmitter literally just, attaches or sticks to it. There is no clicking. There is no heavy adhesive there. There's relatively no skin irritation or discomfort. So they can remove it at any time and easily replace the transmitter whenever they would like. So certainly a differentiated, we feel, advantage of our product.
There's no real issue then with pump connectivity with taking something like that on or off. I mean, I would assume if you took the transmitter off, then a pump, and we're kind of theoretical here, Brian, a pump would say, oh, I'm not getting a signal currently right now, so I'll go back into manual mode or something like that. If I'm getting too ahead of myself, just let me know. I'm just trying to think, if you are taking the transmitter off, there would have to be a way for the pump to understand that.
So as you look at how it might communicate with a pump, today the sensor is powered and communicated, or the values are drawn out of the sensor that's underneath the skin by the transmitter. If the transmitter is not on the body, then as you just said, you're not getting a CGM value. So anytime that would happen, then depending on the pump's mechanism, it would fall back into its original settings and the patient would still be getting their basal rates based on however that pump is set. But it certainly wouldn't be in AID mode per se, because you would not be getting any value from the sensor when the transmitter is not attached to the silicone adhesive.
Did something change in the technology to support the sensor reaching 12 months instead of 6? Or were these trials just finding that the sensor could last for a year?
It's a great question, Stacey, and I will say right up front here, I'm not the technical expert. Tim Goodnow was so good at explaining this. But again, in very basic terms, we've added some redundancies. So instead of having what's ultimately 2 areas that would be detecting on the inserted sensor, there are now 4. So there's some more redundancy in there that helps, with survivability, which is super important when you're going from 90 to 180 to 365 days. But as far as the rest of the mechanisms on it, there's probably a little bit more of the dexamethasone, which is to help with the inflammatory response of having something inserted underneath the skin. There's probably a little bit more that's attached to that silicone ring to make it last for a year. So I'm sure there's a few upgrades to the platform. But as far as I believe the sensing technology and the basics of our system, I believe it's just being able to survive a year versus 6 months. And that's something that has been worked on for a while. So the basic premise, the exceptional accuracy, the way that this works, as I said earlier, is the same.
In the clinical trials for this, did anything stand out for the people who used this for a year, or I guess more, because many of them, I'm sure, had used it previously?
Yeah. Again, I'm going to say the very positive part here is we doubled the wear time, but nothing really changed. So we certainly didn't see anything, and all that is published, as you know, today. So from our 180-day results and everything that happened within that trial to our 365-day results, they were incredibly similar, same performance characteristics, relatively no adverse events, and quite boring. And that's what we want in a FDA submission and a result. So we were ecstatic to be able to claim 365 days, right? Get the accuracy and their performance across that and the survivability. It really was a tremendous positive to see this happen.
Got it. And, I think one of the concerns that many of my listeners have is, what if I change my mind, right? I'm not sure I want this under my skin for a year. And it's tough for me to ask you these questions because, look, you work for the company. I appreciate your candor, but at the same time, it's a hard question to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. What happens if somebody doesn't like this product?
Right back to the interview. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Edgepark. Managing diabetes doesn't need to get in the way of your passion, your social life, or your budget. Edgepark can help you simplify your diabetes journey so you can focus on other important things. Edgepark offers a wide array of continuous glucose monitors, such as the Dexcom G7, Freestyle Libre 3, and more. Plus, Edgepark accepts most insurance plans and handles the paperwork. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Edgepark logo to learn more.
Yeah, they can stop wearing the transmitter and it can be sitting underneath the skin and they wouldn't know any different because you literally don't see it, feel it, or really have any interaction with it. Obviously, we would like that individual to have it removed after a year because that's the indication for the product. But if they chose not to use it, they simply would stop using it. If they so chose to really remove themselves from the optionality of using it anytime during that year, they would simply have to go back and have a removal, which, literally takes 5 to 10 minutes. It's a very simple procedure to put in. It's a very simple procedure to take it out. But, clearly you're fairly committed when you, have it inserted. And I think that would be a tough decision for somebody if they really didn't like it and they really wanted it out of their body. I would hope that they would take maybe a little bit of a CGM holiday, a little vacation, and come back and put the silicone adhesive on, throw on the transmitter, and see all the positives that it can generate for you.
Did anybody in the trials want it removed?
No, no, did not. Yeah, it's a great question, right? Because as you said, you're clearly pot committed when you have something inserted, but there's so many advantages to that as well. We hope that the patient who does it is excited about it, continues to go, and we certainly haven't seen much of that to my knowledge. So at this point, that really has not been something that has occurred very often, if at all.
Got it. All right, Brian, you used to work for Tandem. So I need to take advantage of having you here to kind of flip this to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
People are really curious about when Eversense will connect with pumps, when we'll see interoperability. What does it take for the pump companies? Any insight you can share in terms of, how we've got, a few different pumps in the United States that are available now. I assume Eversense is trying to talk to everybody. You've already alluded to the fact that, we'll see it's kind of hard. What should people with diabetes be aware of for this process?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Stacey, because I was the one sitting with the Senseonics folks all the way back to my very first couple months at Tandem in 2016, where they came in and talked to us about the product and would we be interested in some collaborations. And I think the answer you get from most pump companies is the effort needs to be worth the results, right? And so we need to see more patients on it to be able to go through to justify the resources and the process that is necessary from a technical and R&D perspective to connect the two devices. And, as Senseonics has continued to upgrade its products and process, and the discussions continued. And again, that's how I know Tim and the team so well. We want to see growth from a pump perspective. As a pump company, you want to see growth in the CGM. So again, that investment, yields a positive return on investment. So here we come now to the 365 product, which shows, I think, much more upside than the products before. And whether it's the year insertion or whether it's the, weekly calibrations, we believe this value proposition is higher. And then when you look at the pipeline, I think we have a much more compelling story to convince a pump company to invest the resources necessary to do the work to connect the two devices. And we have done some of that work already. So we can, from a Senseonics perspective, Mukul Jain, who is the COO there, can spend quite a bit of time helping a pump company do that because, again, it's not that hard. It just takes some resources and effort. And so then my job is to convince them that it's worth it and we want to offer patients choice. And, not every CGM works for every patient. So having Senseonics as part of the value proposition would help a pump company market its product to a broader base. And again, offering that choice, I think, is a very compelling, marketing message or leaning into the patient message. So there's still some work to be done there, but it's becoming easier and easier. And like we just said earlier, Bluetooth connectivity is fairly standard now. So we're not reinventing the wheel on those pieces. I just need to get some more traction so that the pump companies feel it's worth their time to do it. And definitely living on the other side for 8 years and telling Tim that is very interesting for me now, turning around. And I know all the pump companies well, right? I know all the leaders of the pump companies with my time here in the space. So now I'm pitching them on why they should be giving me the resources to connect our products. And we have some fun conversations with that, to say the least.
Are there any features of any pumps that would make it a better match for a CGM like this? Or is it really just a question of finding the companies that really just want to work with you and want to make the investment?
Great question. I think it's more of the latter, right? Any of the companies would be able to connect with our device, and any of the companies I think would benefit from connecting with the Eversense 365, but they need to have the resources to do it, and they need to see the value proposition to do it, and they need to want to offer that choice. And, my job is to get as many patients on the product as possible so that it is a value proposition that is a can't miss for the pump company. And the patients that are on it, there's several today that would love to consider that, and several that would probably consider our product if it did connect to a pump. So it's probably more of the latter. Do they really have the time and effort, the desire to do it today? There's really no advantage of one pump over the other. They're all connecting now with their AID systems.
Let's go back to that subject I put a pin in, which is the future. I always love it when you guys want to talk about what's next, because that's always a big question from listeners. And it sounds like, I think we had talked about this a couple of years ago, more theoretically, that the idea here is to get the entire Eversense device under the skin. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Be careful here what we've shared publicly, but I think it's a fairly simplistic explanation that there's really two things that need to happen to be inserted underneath the skin. First and foremost, it would be to add a battery to the device, today the battery is powered by the transmitter being on top of the skin. If you think about pacemakers and other implantable devices, they're underneath the skin for years and years and years and are able to be powered. So miniaturization of energy or batteries is certainly something that is out there today. And, we want to keep this product small. We want to keep the insertion fairly simple. So the next product will then add a battery to it. And if that battery is underneath the skin, you could either flash it. If you think back to the early Libre product where you would flash it with a phone, or you could wear a transmitter over the top to still get continuous transmissions of the glucose values. And then the next step would be to add the Bluetooth. So you would take the Bluetooth out of the transmitter and you would take that Bluetooth and add it again to the inserted part of the sensor. And now you have a fully inserted CGM. So you no longer have to wear anything on the outside of the body. Both the battery and the Bluetooth are now connected to the sensor. And again, for a year's time, which would be the goal, that product is now operating, giving continuous glucose readings to a phone, to a pump, to a watch. Both those projects are well underway. I think we'll probably share some more in the earnings call coming up here in early November, but Tim has talked about that quite often of the pipeline. And yeah, that's the next piece.
Brian, I know you're being careful of what you can say publicly, but you can tell us anything.
Oh, I'm sure.
We're
I'm
really
sure.
good friends now.
I'm sure. That's why Tim's on here, to make sure I don't say too much.
Right, we've got the PR folks on the call.
Yeah. No, it's exciting. Stacey, and we go back to what we've just discussed. That's part of the value proposition when you talk to a pump company is, we really feel this is an inflection point with 365 having a CGM that lasts a year. We think we're going to see, several more patients consider this for their, if they're first to CGM technology, or if they're having some challenges with their existing technology. We think the 365 value proposition will get more folks over. The more folks we get over, the more the pump companies will be interested in that integration. But when we talk to them about the pipeline and the real timeline on that, which is now tangible, we feel very strong about that, and they do as well. You can imagine that having a fully implanted CGM and not having anything on the outside of the body has a tremendous appeal to many that are looking for CGM technology. We're not only selling what we have today, and we're very happy to have gotten the 365 approval and get ready to move forward with the broad launch of the product. But talking about the futures is pretty cool too. And the pump companies certainly recognize that. And, the longer you wait, the longer it takes to get integrated. Maybe there's some favorites out there. So I use that as a little bit of leverage, as you can imagine.
You've been in the diabetes world a long time. And while med tech, I guess, is a very wide and vast industry, I've only ever been in the diabetes community. My son was diagnosed almost 18 years ago, which is just bananas to think about for me. And I've been doing this show a long time. But when we talk about these devices, for people with type 1 diabetes especially, this is such a personal decision. It becomes really part of your body and part of your life in a way that I don't think people who don't have diabetes really understand. From your perspective, having worked at Tandem, a pump my son has had attached physically to his body for more than 10 years now, and the CGM, which is, this one, it's under your skin. Do you have that perspective? I'm sure you have that understanding, Brian, that you're not just dealing with mechanics here, right? This is such an intimate part of people's lives. I don't know that I have a question here, but I'd love your perspective on that.
Yeah, boy, Stacey, I could talk about it for hours. So I do not have diabetes. I do not live with type 1 or type 2. And I've been very fortunate to not have too many family members really in that as well. I knew some of the Tandem folks from my diagnostic background, as they had come from a diagnostic background. So when I got the phone call to come and become the chief commercial officer, I was new to diabetes in 2016. And what I found right out of the gate was what a community, the advocacy, the empowerment in the community, the knowledge in the community, the tight knit of the community. It's why I haven't left now. I don't think I could ever. It's just it's very powerful, right? And we talk about empowering patients to live a life uninterrupted, right? That whole patient experience, enabling confident decisions as you treat your diabetes. We've come so far just in even the 9 years I've been doing it, right? I'm not even a veteran as you look around at so many folks. I work with Dr. Kaufman, right? Just amazing the wealth of experience and knowledge and how far we've come with it. but it is highly personal and it's not for everybody. And some folks choose not to wear a pump. Some folks choose not to wear a CGM. Some folks want it all. Some folks, as you know, are looping and doing things, at the highest level. So I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, offering patients choice, making sure you always put the patient first, figuring out ways to help the healthcare provider who are, I wouldn't say stressed today, but certainly very, very busy, right? How do we make it easier for them? How do we give them the information that they need, the education that they need to be able to make decisions and spend the proper time, with the patients to reduce stress on all ends, right? Managing your diabetes is stressful at times. It's tough, and it is for the healthcare providers as well. So I think trying to concentrate on the patient, the product, and making it as seamless and easy as possible. And if you do that, health improves, right? Healthcare costs go down, patient satisfaction goes up, and then there's a place for us as companies, to have a meaningful impact. And obviously we're in the business to run a successful company as well, right? So you balance that customer satisfaction, that patient interaction, with company profitability, or in some cases sustainability, right? Just to be able to be in, because it's a crowded, very competitive marketplace. But just in the time I've been here, it has really continued to get even more fascinating. The products continue to get better. And we really believe that folks living with diabetes have more choices now. Therefore, they live I hope your son feels he can manage his diabetes better today than potentially he could have 5 or 10 years ago. And that would lead to better health and better happiness and ultimately very positive long-term effects for everybody. So I love it here. I love the advocacy. I love the energy. I love the knowledge. There's a lot of passion in this space, as you well know.
Yeah, I will say my son, who is a college sophomore, is doing better, knock on all the wood I can find right now, than I thought he would in college because of the AID systems and because of better technology and because, he's been able to kind of let diabetes run in the background, which was our goal all along. But I will tell you, Brian, this is a kid who wrestled in high school, and we would have loved that under the skin. You want to talk about a gross sport my listeners are sick of me hearing this, but a gross sport for diabetes. Everything just falls off your body. You're sweating. You're disgusted. I was not a fan of wrestling, but he loved it. So yeah, I get it. I get it for sure.
Yeah, the device is getting knocked off, and something like that would certainly be a real. You can put enough adhesive tape on for that, but good for him, right? And it does make me smile to see the technology and the advances in diabetes to allow him as a sophomore in college to live his best life, right? And not to have to live home with mom hovering over him every day to make sure that he's in range, right? That's the last thing I should say you're lovely. So maybe you're one of the few he'd like to hang out with, but it's awesome to hear it, right? And that's what we want. And that's the toughest age, as we all know, right? As we get a little bit older.
Anything. Now I'm all superstitious, Brian. That's really funny. No. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate this. I hope you'll come back and keep us posted. Such high interest on this. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
We appreciate you as well. Have a wonderful weekend.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information in the show notes, as always. I'm going to link up information about Eversense from the company. I will also link up our past episodes with them. As I said, we have done a lot. We've been following this product for a while. And here is the information on the charging mechanism, which has changed from the Eversense E3 to the Eversense 365. The E3 transmitter used a charging cable. The Eversense 365 now connects directly to a USB, making it easier and more convenient to charge. I am reading from a company statement. It charges quite quickly. Most people simply do it in the morning when they shower, so the recharge aspect of the transmitter is super simple. But I think the real question here was about the cradle versus a USB cable. So Peter, thank you very much for the question. In Diabetes Connections, the group, that's the best place to go to make sure that you can ask me a question or pass one along for these folks. But I really appreciate that. I hope it answered your question. And if not, please email me, Stacey@diabetes-connections.com, or post in the group, and I'll see what I can do. All right, quick programming note. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm going to be at Mom's Night Out this Friday. I'll be up in Philadelphia. I am not planning on doing an In the News episode. We're going to skip a week. The schedule is just a little bit too much. So that episode, In the News, will be back on November 1st. And then we will continue with every 2 weeks. That's every other Friday for In the News, and our long format interviews are always on Tuesdays. That will not be affected here. Thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacy Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.
Now that Benny is on his own more and more, I'm grateful that he's open about his diabetes journey and always tells his friends how to use his emergency glucagon, Gvoke HypoPen. Gvoke HypoPen is a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above. If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you are at risk for your blood sugar going too low. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready to treat a very low blood sugar with Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more, go to gvokeglucagon.com/Stacy. That's gvokeglucagon.com/STACEY. Gvoke should not be used if you have a tumor in the gland on top of your kidneys called pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information.